Doctors and nurses who deliver babies. What strange, funny things have people screamed while giving birth? Story 1. I'm a nurse, and one of the strangest things I've seen happen while someone is giving birth is when one patient decided to tell her boyfriend that it wasn't his baby. But of course, that made the whole room silent and the boyfriend just left without saying a thing. Story 2. My grandma was telling me about her giving birth to my uncle. She was stationed in Okinawa with my grandpa at the time, so she was in a military hospital, and for some reason, the nurses told her to sit on the toilet. So my grandma was freaking out, screaming, "Oh lordy, lordy, this baby is gonna come out and get stuck in the toilet. God help me." Story 3. When my first child was born, his head was kind of misshapen, and when the doctor lifted him to show my wife, she yelled, "Why the fuck does he look like a raptor?" I lost it. Story 4. My mom almost punched her best friend when I came out with my head all funny. My mom said, "How does she look?" And her friend's response was, "Kind of like E.T." My mom didn't have a sense of humor about it. Story 5. My husband told me that when I was breathing the laughing gas, I screamed, "I'm Lady Darth Vader," as I was pushing. Then I asked the doctor if he felt my tonsils when he had his arm up there. These are my coworkers. Story 6. When my sister was in labor, she was screaming, and our mom was trying to be comforting. "It'll be okay. Take some deep breaths. It'll be over soon." Then my sister looks up at our mom and says, "You have no idea what this is like." Story 7. During labor, about half an hour before the god-awful ripping and tearing, I was losing my shit. My older sister panicked and sort of ran around the room. My mom, the birth coach, told my sister to give me a focal point, something to concentrate on so I didn't jump out of the nearest window. My sister lifted her shirt and showed us her boobs. Hilarity and awful pain ensued. Story 8. No one was responding to the call button as my mom was giving birth, so she yelled, "Do something, honey." My dad ran out into the hallway and screamed at the top of his lungs, "It's showtime, and I'm not a very good catcher." Story 9. Right after my son was born via C-section, I was still higher than a hippie at Woodstock from the drugs they gave me. So they handed me my beautiful newborn son, and the first words out of my mouth were, "Oh my God, his scrotum is huge." Then I laughed hysterically. Story 10. They gave me something for pain before my actual epidural, and I kept telling my husband that I was fucked up, and he said sweetly, "Please don't tell the nurses that." So when they came in and asked how I was feeling, I looked at my husband and said, "Oh crap, what was I supposed to say instead of fucked up?" But really, I was fucked up. Story 11. This happened to be out of the room. Dad, a gravelly-voiced country boy, ran out the hall and yelled, "Something's peeking." The midwife answered calmly, "I'll be right there," almost immediately followed by a gravelly voice yelling, "I don't hear no feet." The baby was born very shortly after that. Story 12. They had a fetal monitor attached to my head when I was born. I had little beads on the cord, so my father said I looked like white Stevie Wonder. My mother proceeded to scream, "She's blind?" Story 13. When I had my son, I birthed him intact in the amniotic sac, which made the pushing process a bit harder than it should be. During this, I told my midwife my vagina hurts. She responded, very matter-of-factly, "You're having a baby." One of those moments when I wanted to yell, "You know what I mean." Story 14. When my girlfriend was going into labor, I kept telling her just to relax and everything would be okay. Finally, she angrily yelled, "Why don't I dilate your penis 10 centimeters and see how well you relax?" The whole room lost it with that one. Story 15. My friend is a doctor and was in labor for about 40 hours. She was in quite a lot of pain. Her husband is also a doctor and had been working overnight on call for the hospital when he joined her at the bedside. After a few hours, exhausted, he fell asleep. This did not sit well with the mom-to-be. As painful contractions hit, she screamed at him, "Wake the F up." Story 16. They didn't expect it to go so quickly when I was in labor. A guy from the hospital's billing part came up and asked us about our income when the nurse came in. She took one look and yelled down the hall for the doctor as the kiddo's head was crowning. She gave the guy a look like, "WTF, get out." I had the worst contraction ever and I screamed out, "He's just asking what I make per Jesus motherfucking Christ year." Story 17. My partner and I had tried hard to have kids and lost 2 to premature birth. I was in labor with our third, this time full-term baby amid active labor. I was in immense pain and he was cheering me on, and I suddenly screamed at him, "After this baby, I'm only doing this one more time." I guess it was a pretty odd thing to say because the midwife started laughing. I was being practical. Story 18. Mom had a long labor with me, 14 hours, and ended up having a C-section. I had wrapped the umbilical cord around my neck and stopped breathing. When she came to, they told her she had a girl. She replied, "I could have had a fucking turtle." Story 19. I was on some IV drugs that made me fall asleep in between contractions and also made me super loopy. My husband tells me that I started talking to him about exploding dolphins before I lost track of my train of thought. I also said fuck having children right after my daughter was born and caused one of the nurses who'd just come in to stare at me like I was a monster. I clarified that I had no problem with the kid, just the process of getting her out. Story 20. I have a friend who said she was minutes away from birthing her daughter, and her midwife was checking to see how far down the birth canal the baby's head was. She shouted, "Damn it, only one person at a time in my vagina." Story 21. After my daughter was born, I was getting stitched up after a severe tear and remembered saying, "Jesus Christ, are you sewing me a new vagina or what?" Unfortunately, the topical, local painkiller hadn't kicked in yet and those stitches hurt. Story 22. I had my tubes tied after having my second child. After surgery, I was still pretty drugged up and in pain from birth and surgery. The nurses asked me to move from one bed to another after surgery. I told the nurses to roll me over like the blueberry girl in Willy Wonka. Everyone had a good laugh. Story 23. I had watched both my sisters being born, and their mom shit both times, which was disgusting. I was 24 and had a hot OBGYN who was only a few years older than I was, and I was terrified that I was going to shit while giving birth. When it came time to push, I kept screaming at the nurses and doc, "Am I shitting? Am I pooping? Please tell me." I managed not to shit, and I was extremely thankful for that. Story 24. I was with my older sister when she delivered my nephew. The birth went fine, but afterwards she was still so high from the epidural that she insisted on walking me to my car. It was 2 a.m. Finally, I told her, "Sissy, I'm fine. You need a rest. You just had a baby." And she replied, "We'll go quick. They won't even know I'm gone. I'll carry the baby to the parking lot with us." Story 25. When my mother was in labor with my oldest sister, it was excruciating and prolonged because my sister was coming out the wrong way. The doctor afterward referred to it as a brow presentation. So she had to get a C-section. So the doctor explained this to her by saying, "The baby's not coming out." Not the best lead-in. My mother looked at him, utterly bewildered, and said, "Well, it can't stay here." Story 26. When I was born, my dad didn't know that babies are usually born face down. And as I was coming out, he screamed, "Oh my God, she doesn't have a face." Story 27. When my daughter was born, I was behind my girlfriend. I didn't want to look at the vagina. When she came out, the first thing that popped into my head, and I said out loud, "What the fuck is this alien? There is no way that's my baby." Doc laughed and said, "Don't worry, we'll clean her up." Story 28. 7 hours into labor, my fiancé hadn't said anything. When the midwife left the room for a second, my fiancé looked ragged and sweaty. Finally, she turned her head, looked me straight in the eye, and asked in a very rough voice, "Do you fancy me now?" Story 29. Before my mother gave birth to me, the doctor said, "Let's take the girl out for the sake of International Women's Day." 5 minutes afterward, I was born and the doctor gave me to my mother. My mother shouted, "This girl has balls." Story 30. I was in labor and pushing the baby out pretty fast. Got the head out in one contraction. Then, for some reason, some of the nurses decided that she needed to instruct me on how to push. My doctor yelled, "Shut up, she knows what she's doing."